The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this, what is it, Sunday afternoon. It's a hangout. Although so far, Jennifer's the only one who joined us. Hey, Jennifer.
Hello.
Hi. So the pressure is going to be on you. Of course, it's also open Q&A, so you guys can ask anything, any price, any amount. You can use the SuperChat feature to ask questions. So far, we had like 4 people sign up, so I assume people are going to show up maybe a little late, or maybe they forgot, or maybe who knows what happened. But if you want a show today, you guys are going to have to ask questions. I didn't prepare anything. I assumed I was just asking questions. Just do a bunch of $2 questions. Just list them over. All right. Thanks, guys, for joining me. Thanks, Jennifer, for being here. Go for it. What's your question?
I was thinking about something Sam Sater said. I thought do you think it was an example of the mysticism on the left when he was talking about drugs? He wanted, when you have a new drug, he wanted you to be able to know 30 years from now what the effects may be and whether it's ever going to hurt anyone ever. And you can't know that. I mean, knowledge just doesn't magically come into your head. Is that an example of the left being mystical?
I don't know if it's mysticism because it's called the precautionary principle. I think that's what he's referring to, and it's a principle that applies to more than just drugs. It's across the board, and basically what they're saying is we don't want to take risk. We're not willing to engage in uncertain behavior, and what we're going to do is if there's any uncertainty about the future, we're just not going to do it. Now, they know that destroys innovation and growth. They know that would limit kind of long-term economic success, economic growth, and they're willing to accept that. They don't care. They don't care. So in the name of no growth, in the name of no risk, eliminating all risk from society, eliminating all risk from our lives, they're quite willing to take on the trade-off of, yeah, okay, we know we can't have that, so we won't grow. That's fine. At least nobody will get hurt. I mean, this is the consequence of egalitarianism, right? If you think about egalitarianism, it's not only that nobody can succeed because then they're a tall poppy, they're better than everybody else, but it also means that nobody should be allowed to fail, right? So if there's a drug and it cures cancer for 1 million people, but it kills one, it makes one person worse off, then they're going to say, well, of course we don't want it. I mean, what did Governor Cuomo said at the beginning of the pandemic? He said, you can't put a price on life. One life is too many. We will do everything to preserve every single life in the state of New York, as he was sending old people into nursing homes to infect all the other old people, right, and killing hundreds. It really is, this acceptance of egalitarianism with regard to risks. And egalitarianism as applied to risk means no risk, no innovation, no change, no uncertainty. Whatever will be, will be. And that's what that's what so many on the left are advocating for. Jennifer, did you get an email that said that it was at 3 o'clock, not at 8? Was there at any point, was there something that indicated it might be at 8 p.m.?
I don't think so. I thought my original one said 3 o'clock.
All right, so Debbie joined you. Two of the 4 women who listened to you on Brook Show on YouTube. It's great. It's true. The statistics are still what they are. It's still 97% men, 3% women. All right. Jennifer just asked a question. So Debbie, you're on. That was quick.
Okay. So my question, so it won't be quick. It has to do with the meaning of having a self. And what prompted me to think about this and to want to ask about it is I listened to Michael Malice on Lex Friedman recently and really enjoyed that. They had an interesting conversation about, Michael said, I don't think most people have souls. And then they kind of had some interesting back and forth about whether that's a permanent situation or whether people can sort of remedy the situation, come online, so to speak. And I hadn't ever explicitly asked that question of myself. I'd always thought like not having a self was sort of an outlier situation, like an anomaly, like something really bad has to happen for that to be true. But then I thought, I can see their point. And so in that case, I wonder, what does it actually mean to have a self? I don't think that I had fully answered that question for myself before.
So,
and one thing that,
I don't think I clearly heard you. Is that a self or soul?
Self or soul, either way. I mean, I'm kind of using the terms interchangeably.
Okay.
What I think is being in a consistent state of focus and having an active mind, sustained over time consistently, is what results in someone having a self or a soul. I mean, I think they're kind of the same thing.
Yep.
So in that case, maybe it is kind of rare. At least given, maybe I'm a little bit made cynical by seeing just all the loudest people on the internet and in the media and so forth being so obviously not meeting that standard. Maybe there's more people that actually do, but percentage wise. So what do you think about that? What it means to have a self, to agree with my criterion? And then in terms of, do the majority of people really have them?
Yeah, I mean, I think Marlis is probably right. That is, if soul is, and I don't know if self and soul are the same thing, but they probably are. They're probably the same thing looked at from different aspects. Yeah. I mean, Ayn Rand talked about a soul is something you create, something you mold through your decisions, through your choices. And it's something that requires focus and engagement and thinking and conscious choices about what kind of person you want to be, right? What kind of principles you want to live by. So in that sense, very few people do that, do the work, have that kind of focus, engage in it. Now, what is the status of those people? Because there are people who, let's say, are super productive, but beyond that have nothing. So they're focused in one realm, but not focused in another realm. Yeah, I mean, they don't have a soul in the sense that we mean it as a whole. They might have elements of their consciousness in which they're focused, in which they're active, but it's not, they probably don't even fully enjoy it. Now, I don't know how to do the percentages, right? What percentage of the population?
Not a number, no, I just meant generally.
But I do think I do think it's a majority of people that don't. And it's kind of sad in terms of the human potential, in terms of what is, because I think they all can have a soul. I also think that at some point it becomes too late for them. And there's a sense in which midlife crises are attempts, usually shallow, superficial, and stupid, to gain some meaning in their lives. And that's another thing. You've got to have meaning. You've got to have purpose, I think, to have a self. You've got to be driven in some way. Otherwise you're just a billiard ball, just bouncing around. You know, you might make choices, but they're meaningless because they're not referring to any principle. So, I mean, this Rand's notion of free will and her notion of soul and self, I don't know anybody that comes close in terms of that perspective, because even the people who think people have free will, they don't really know what that means, or they certainly don't put it as focus, turning the switch on, turning your consciousness on. And then the idea that you build, that you create what's in your consciousness, that you create how you know, the content of your mind, that you can undo the bad premises that you might have there, but then yeah,
It takes a lot of time and work,
effort, and being conscious of it. You have to want to do it. So yeah, and I don't know, I haven't thought about it, but can people have half a soul? You know, can people be partially? Probably. They could probably have a imperfect or flawed self. They you know, so I don't know enough. I haven't thought about it enough to. Anka is a really good essay in Greg Salameri's book, the one he edited with Alan Godhelf on.
I've read that. Concepts in the Role in Knowledge.
No, he has another one on the self-made soul.
Oh, I'm gonna have to find that. I love their work.
It's really good. It's really good. So Anka has a long essay on just kind of this question. And I think the conclusion is, yeah, most people just go through life without really having one, or without having a fully developed one. And that means
that's the part where I get. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, in that sense, they don't have a self. They don't have an I. They don't really. Who are they? They're just this collection of random stuff that has popped into their heads. They're not. There's no coherent self there, and that's what you see online. You see people who just mutter stuff that they've heard from somebody else, and they're just recycling stuff, and they never. Stephanie says I pronounced Salmieri's name wrong. All right, I don't know. Salimieri, no, Salmieri. Anyway, that's Stephanie. So yes, it's so sad when you think about it in those terms.
It really is. And they were not happy about it either when they were talking about it. You know, it's such a tragic loss of potential and happiness.
And then think about what the world would be like with, you know, people. Wow. I mean, just think of the just, you know, just the number of good people that would be out there that one could enjoy. It would be so much fun. It would be so much fun.
Yeah.
All right. There's a huge discussion on the chat now about how to pronounce Greg's name. I'm just going to call him Greg. Much safer.
So we're talking about what's it mean to have a self and everything, and then what they pick up on is the pronunciation.
Huge debate between Stephanie, Diego, Thomas, everybody's chiming in. So, all right, let's see. Scott asked a question. What is the standard for building coalitions? If Deirdre M's religion is okay, can't Prager, Shapiro, Peterson be okay as allies in pushing back on CRT? I mean, sure. If the goal of the coalition is clearly defined, not as with a coalition for liberty, but with a coalition for pushing back on CRT, then a lot of people can be allies. But if the coalition is we're for liberty, then very few people can be part of that coalition because very few people have a proper definition of liberty. So you don't want to be fighting with people. You don't want to be people by your side in the fight who disagree about what you are fighting for and what you are fighting against. CRT is clearly defined. It's narrow enough. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people out there that I consider, in a broad sense, allies. in the fight against CRT, who I would not consider allies in a fight for anything else. Now, the other issue though is, are any of them so undermining of other ideas you have that you just don't want to associate with them? So, you know, I worry about Prager because Prager says you can't have morality without religion. You basically, you know, potentially, you know, there's nothing between you and being a murderer if you don't have religion. Shapiro doesn't say that. Deirdre McCloskey doesn't say that. Peterson just says, well, if you believe you shouldn't murder other people, you are religious, whether you know it or not. It's just like, okay. But at least he doesn't say that. So there is a sense in which some of them are more undercutting than others. Now, I consider Deirdre much more significant than the others because Deirdre is much more philosophical or much more intellectual, not philosophical, much more intellectual. And her flaws are far less significant than her virtues when it comes to the broader coalition, right? The broader aims. And I think Shapiro is better generally than Prager and better than Peterson because I think he's more intellectual and has a deeper understanding of some of the issues, particularly with related to capitalism. I think Shapiro has an understanding of capitalism that neither Prager nor Peterson have. But in terms of forming coalitions, they have to be narrow, they have to be focused, and they have to be explicit. This is what we're after, and we're not endorsing everything else. So within those categories, you can create coalitions with a lot of different people. But again, coalition around what, for what purpose, and so on. So if it's just to push back against CRT, fine, but then it has to be explicit. We're working with you to push back against CRT. We're not working with you in the cause of liberty, because fact is, you guys don't know what liberty is. I know, Scott, you just want to destroy the left. You don't care if what's left over is a apocalypse. As long as the left is dead, you're happy. That's not my aim in life. I want to establish the good. I don't care who I have to run over in order to do that, but establishing the good is what's important. And it doesn't, and my battle is much harder because you not only have to destroy the left, but you have to have something left over once you do. We need more objectivism, absolutely. All right, thanks, Scott, for the question. Thanks, Stephen, for your appreciation of my ability to entertain. All right, let's see. Naveen has joined us. Naveen, you're on.
Yeah, you're on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Question about something that came up during Michael Malice's interview you had with Lex, right? So about anarchism, right? So there was a moment where it came up when Michael was asking you if anarchism is it's not practical or it's immoral, and it came up and it went into the topic of objective law, and I don't think you took it very further. You kind of answered the question of you cannot do it because there'll be competing security agencies and they'll basically fight and things like that. But do you have a moral argument for it, that it would be actually immoral to do a thing like that or to establish a system like that? Have you thought of it in that way at all?
I mean, there's a sense in which it's the same answer because it's immoral because it leads to violence. It's immoral. If you think about, so let's start over. So if you think about individual rights are moral principles. They're a recognition of the nature of force and a recognition of the nature of human life and what it necessitates. And so morality requires there to be, in a social context, an agency that helps define and protect individual rights. That is because there is no individual rights under anarchy. There is no meaning to individual rights under anarchy because there's no enforcement mechanism. There's just, yeah, you have rights, bam, I shoot you, who cares, right? I mean, in the jungle where force is acceptable, where force is legitimized, individual rights are irrelevant. You might have them, but so the only way to implement a regime, a system of individual rights is if one has government. So it's immoral in the sense that it rejects the whole idea of individual rights. It rejects the whole idea implicitly of non-initiation of force. Anarchy is the rejection of what the libertarians called the non-initiation of force principle. So it undermines their own standard.
Okay, and you define those individual rights, and what falls under that by basically objective law. Like what
objective law is a mechanism by which we clearly define what is covered under individual rights, and we clearly define the mechanism by which they are enforced. That is, they're not just you trespassing onto my home, whether trespass is a violation of rights or not. But then the question is, if you did trespass onto my home, whether the objective procedures by which I prove that you trespassed, by which we take you to a court of law, by which we try you, by which we prosecute you, by which we punish you, all of that requires objective law, an objective process. All of that is rejected by anarchy, which just assumes that just happens.
So you just kind of fight it out and figure out who's got the upper hand.
It boils down to fighting it out because okay. What is the other criteria by which you decide under anarchy? There is no one standard. There's several standards. Whatever group can enforce. There's might is right under anarchy.
Right, and they're saying that, okay, we'll have a marketplace and we'll, that it'll evolve and stuff, but
and the marketplace would, in a sense, restrain force, restrain might is right. But if might is right, then if force is part of the marketplace, then me using force against you is just a marketplace thing. I mean, what's the difference between it and every other transaction in the marketplace? They don't view force as some separate, unique social phenomena that requires a unique institution to deal with it, i.e. government. They view force as just another market phenomenon. So just like I can buy lunch, I can shoot you. And yeah, there are mechanisms by which we deal with shooters, just like the mechanisms by which you can return something to Amazon after you bought it, right? But it's just the same kind of process. There's nothing particularly evil about shooting versus returning a good to Amazon or whatever, right? It's all the market.
Got it, thanks.
All right, Jennifer.
In regards to that conversation, I just thought, so like when America started, Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence to let Britain know they wanted to break away and why and all that. But let's say you weren't going to break away or have a revolution, you just were going to start a new country. And at any time in humans want to start a new country, then it would be important then, like what you just said, to write down the conditions that you expect to live under. That would be an important thing to do, always, right?
Absolutely. I mean, let's say we start a colony in Mars, right? It would be important to have, going into the project, a defined constitution, Declaration of Independence, Declaration of whatever, that defines exactly how we're going to live, what we're going to do, and what are the guidelines by which society is going to be structured, and then people can decide if they want to come or not.
Yeah, and then the laws, like you were talking about, the actual concrete laws come from that.
Yes, and that's the rule of a constitution. That's the purpose of a constitution.
Right.
in a sense, the Declaration of Independence is kind of a preamble to a constitution.
Right.
I wish that was the preamble, because I think a lot of nonsense would be saved from us, like so many legal scholars who don't think the Constitution has the Declaration of Independence has any relevance to understanding the Constitution. There are legal thinkers both on left and right who reject the importance of the Declaration of Independence. And that's tragic, because the Declaration is where the idea of individual rights is explicitly articulated. It's not in the Constitution. It should be, though.
Right.
Thanks, Jennifer. Debbie.
So speaking of a colony on Mars, would you want to go?
Today, probably not. But if I was 20, 25, 30, yeah. I think so. It would be such a cool
Yeah, I think I would definitely go. That wasn't my question, but you brought it up, or someone brought it up. So
I guess as long as there's no Twitter there, I'm going.
Yeah, I don't know. Given that the tech people who are making that happen, I have a feeling that Twitter be established fast, early and often.
It would lag though, right? Because I don't know how fast it would take sound wave. The signal to get to Mars. I don't know what the lag is.
Yeah, I think it would be something like a minute or two, a couple of minutes maybe.
Yeah, in Twitter, that's infinity. Yeah. That's almost infinity in
mm-hmm.
Twitter at times.
Yeah, it's true.
Right.
The attention span will not tolerate a 2-minute lag.
That's right.
So my question is about government interfering with parents in their taking how they raise their kids and take care of their kids. And I know there's a line there, obviously, when it comes to some kind of physical abuse. And the thing that interests me is the case of really religious parents who would deny some kind of medical treatment to their kids. And I remember a case in the news maybe 10, 12, some years ago, where there was a legal battle between a religious parents who wanted to deny their kid a life or death treatment on religious grounds. The kid would have died for sure if they hadn't. And I believe the government intervened. And at the time when I heard that, I was glad. But that doesn't mean that it's the right principle, because I felt that way. I think in that case, because it's not that they're actively hurting the kid or killing the kid. They're just saying, no, because of our religion, we're going to deny this intervention, this medical intervention. So yeah. I still tend to think that the government did the right thing. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's a very dangerous line, and it's a tricky line to define. And it's good that it went to the court system. That is, that a judge made the decision, that it wasn't just obvious that the government gets to decide, because I think a judge would have to make the decision on a case-by-case basis. You can come up with some principles, but with medicine, because there's such a difficult line there. So clearly, if the treatment is life or death, then yeah, I mean, then it's pretty simple. If it's not quite life or death, or if the treatment is really risky, then it becomes more complicated. So yeah. I definitely think the state's responsibility to ultimately be the protector of the child's rights needs to play into this. And you could count it as child abuse certainly if it's a clear-cut case where if the child doesn't get treated, then they die. Then yes, I think it's good that the government intervenes in cases like that. And the religious liberty. I mean, what sickens me is if there were secular parents, and they said, Mother Earth spoke to us, or maybe Mother Earth it would work, but the gremlins spoke to us. and told us that we shouldn't treat our children, or I saw it in the crystals, right? Then nobody would object to the government forcing them. But because it's some religious sect, you know, supposedly religious freedom. No, religious freedom is the freedom of ideas. It's not just religion, you know, whether the founding fathers exactly articulated right or not. It's you know, religious people don't have special rights. They don't have special ability to abuse other people in the name of religion. So this would definitely be child abuse. And exactly where the line is, I don't know. That's what a good legal system would have to be involved in, would have to be engaged with.
Yeah, actually, I was raised in a religion that was not too different from that. We weren't allowed to get vaccinations, and I never saw a doctor until I was like, I don't know how old, maybe in my early teens. And I have no sympathy for that, and that mentality that religion occupies some privileged position in America really sickens me.
I agree with you. Agree completely. How did you? But I find it, you know, inspiring that you got out of that, right? And
I'm very proud.
You should be. You should be. And I'm wondering if you'd say something about how.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I wanted to understand. I mean, because kids have, you know, they're curious about things. So I remember when I was little asking some questions like, how come all these miracles like the sea parting and all those kinds of things, how come stuff like that constantly happens in the Bible and it doesn't happen now? Like, why doesn't it happen anymore? And, you know, my mother has some kind of a story for it. And, you know, and then one time I thought maybe, well, the adults, they know so much more than me. So they must know somehow that there's proof that there's a God. They know it somehow. They seem to know. So I asked my dad, who was actually a minister in this religion, how do we know? How do we know there's a God? And he said, you know, really unsatisfyingly, you've got to have faith. And so I asked my mother one time, how do we know that the Bible isn't just like made up? And how do we know? And the answer was that that's a horrible thing to say. You should never say something like that. And besides, it says in the Bible that we're supposed to have faith.
You're a beautiful child.
Just
Great.
Asking questions.
Yep.
Asking questions, and you know, it's really hard. Something that has nothing to do with reality is completely opposed to reality. It's really hard to contain that and prevent reality from getting in, you know, as long as somebody's at least attempting to think about things a little bit.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just a series of progression, I would say.
And I'd say it's those kind of questions, to relate to your previous question. It's those types of questions that you ask is what builds a self or a soul.
Yeah.
It's and you're doing that as a child. All of us did it as children, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We did it as children, building up to having a soul or a self. And all those co-religionists never ask the questions, and they don't have a soul. You know, they talk about soul a lot in religion, but they have none, because they're just unthinking. It's
because they're told that it's a horrible, evil thing to ask.
Yep.
Or to even have a thought. Like, I was taught that if you even have a thought, like, God reads all your thoughts all the time, and any thought you have that doesn't, like, isn't, I don't know, consistent with the religion, he'll know. And that's a sin. You know, when you've got this totalitarian mindset that literally you can't even have, that your own mind is not a private place. You can't think, you know, it's not, you know, if you, I can understand a little bit why people don't get past that. I mean, not really, because at some point you're going to look at reality.
So they're terrified. It's fear.
They're terrified.
Yeah.
They're terrified. Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what one of the things that, as a little kid, I think I got and rejected. And I rejected religion to some extent because I thought this fear stuff was just stupid. So a God that would do that was just, it just didn't make any sense. And for me, it was a lot easier because I, even though I was exposed to a lot of religion, my family was it was secular. I mean, they were nominally religious, but they were secular. So I was exposed to religion in school because I went to a very religious school when I was first 2 grades. And then, that's the period when I became an atheist was when, I just, while I was going to a very religious school, because it made no sense to me. And I can't remember the exact process, but I remember that this idea that God was like judging you in every thought, and I was a kid and I was supposed to be afraid of this, that I thought was just absurd and ridiculous and turned me off. So I was a rebel even back then. All right, Christopher, thanks for the support. Stefan, thanks for the support. Appreciate it. You guys are really disappointing Ali today. So Super Chat, where are you? No questions. Nobody is curious about anything. All right, let's see. Arthur has kind of a question. You've asked this before, and I guess I didn't answer it then, so I'll have to answer it today. But Arthur put a lot of money behind this question, so 50 Canadian dollars. And he says it's a philosophical question. So let's see if any of you have the answer to this philosophical question. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, is the social justice warrior still offended? So is the idea that social justice warriors offended by trees falling in a forest, but they can't be offended unless they know about the tree falling in the forest. So they could be offended if they see the tree after it's already fallen. So as long as they have evidence of the tree having fallen at some point in time, yes, they would be offended. But social justice warriors are very good at imagining trees fall, and that's all they really need is to imagine. So they see you writing on a piece of paper, and they know that piece of paper was made from wood, which means it's a tree that fell, and they get offended. So even though nobody was there, they weren't there at least to hear the tree fall, they're still offended. I think we've come to the right conclusion. The answer is yes, they're still offended. Oh wait, Jennifer, there was a piece of logical deduction that
I just want to say, I asked once in high school mythology class, how come we say this is mythology when the people back then thought it was true, but now Christianity is true? How come that's mythology and this isn't? And teacher, right in front of everybody, he was pissed because it was right in front of the class. He didn't know what to say.
Another one of those kids that questions authority and questions the study. That's no wonder we're all here and not over there.
My question was about, again, something like a Sam Cedar type, just your typical liberal. Usually if you say to a person like that, well, then the government should just own everything then. It should just own all the buildings, build them all, invent all the drugs and distribute them, because since they know best and nothing will ever fall down if the government does it. But if you say that, they recoil from that and they'll say, oh no, we don't want that. So why don't they? How come they just don't admit that would be the logical place to go?
Well, because they're not interested in logic.
Yeah.
And they certainly are not pursuing their principles to the end result. They will say, look, we just look at the world, and what we see is the government serves an important function, and that if there'd be more government inspectors, that building in Miami probably wouldn't have fallen down. Or if the government had forced the owners of that building to fix it, right? The owners were, of course, the residents in the building. If they'd forced those people to fix it, then the building wouldn't have fallen down. It goes back to that risk question you asked before, right? And we see that But we also see, they say, we also know this, that governments are not good at building iPhones. They're good at creating all the research that makes the iPhone possible, but they're not good at building iPhones. So there's certain things that markets are good for. And indeed, we are big fans of capitalism, big fans of capitalism. You know, Sam Sater will tell you, Elizabeth Warren tells you, Joe Biden the other day said that he's a big fan of capitalism. In its right place, properly regulated, properly controlled. How much controls? Well, we don't know. We'll figure it out as we go along. But the one thing we cannot have is building, falling, people getting drugs and getting side effects, unless they're vaccines. And then it's okay to get side effects because, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly why. But, you know, because the government produced them, or the government decided it's for the common good. So they don't have a coherent ideology. And this is why they're disintegrated, right? It's why Leonard calls them D1s, right? Disintegrated. Their thought is disintegrated, but they still know, they're still somewhat oriented towards reality. So they see in reality capitalism actually working. They see in reality markets produce. They see in reality communism failed. And they know they don't want communism because I failed. They're not really egalitarians because they're not haters enough. They haven't reached that level yet of hatred. And yet they know they don't want capitalism because they you know, that's too scary. That's intimidating. So they focus on some mishmash of everything. And as you push them, you'll see less and less and less markets, but they won't go all the way because that's too scary for them as well, because they know markets work in certain realms. But that's most of the left. Leonard's D1 is a reference to Leonard Peikoff's DIM hypothesis, D-I-M hypothesis. D stands for disintegration, I stands for integration, M stands for misintegration. D1, so D is, the D and the M have ones and twos. The two are more consistent application of the idea, and the two are more consistent, the one is less consistent. So for example, in disintegration, a D2 is a complete nihilist. That's what disintegration leads to. Everything is fragmented, but the Ds refer to epistemologically the inability, unwillingness, belief that it's not okay to integrate, to see the one in the many, but only see the many. The M is integration around a wrong principle, like religion. We integrate everything around a wrong principle, or communism. And a I is integration around the right principle. Florida Nick asks, do you need your headphones? In this case, I do, Florida Nick. Usually I don't, and usually I have them on because I forget to take them off, because that's the way I am. But actually I do, because I can hear Jennifer, Naveen, and Debbie using my headphones. So thank you for for asking, because that's usually useful for me when in a show where I don't have people on with me. I don't need the headphones. You should definitely read the DIM hypothesis by Leonard. It's excellent. It's deep. It's not an easy read because he gets into epistemology, but the sections of that are part of on history and on the application of the theory are fascinating, interesting, and very accessible. The theory itself is dense, but important. All right, Naveen.
Back to the anarchism topic, right?
Yeah.
So one of the other thing that I think Michael mentioned was the concern that a lot of the libertarians have is that there is no recourse, right? That there is no market. So if the government is bad, even for protection, right? What is the recourse? So I think he was asking that. So for example, when these riots and looting is going on, and the government just doesn't protect you, right? But in a private market where it's your own security company, you can say, okay, my security company did a bad job, so I'll go to this other company, things like that. But in a one government scenario, there's nothing like that. There's no other recourse. So what do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is why immigration is so important, right? This is why having open borders globally would be so wonderful, right? So if you could just leave when things got really bad, and you could go. Now, to some extent, the recourse is self-defense, and this is why the Second Amendment, to the extent that it's defined in terms of self-defense, makes sense. You do want to have some protection, but when society goes to hell, in other words, when there's anarchy in the streets, which is exactly what, when there are rioters in the street, there's anarchy, then you have to form a gang to protect yourself. But the best thing to do is to get out of it, to leave, to emigrate. So I am a big believer in competitive governments, but over separate geographic areas. So
I like that idea. So I think you mentioned it. So you want to have one government, but restricted to a geographic location.
yes,
But it's competing in the sense that the people are free to leave.
yes,
That's kind of what you're saying. Okay.
yes. And of course, real authoritarians won't let you leave. And governments like the United States government is nominally free, won't let you come in, or makes it very difficult for you to come in. So it's, yeah, I mean, this is why I take immigration so seriously, because you should have the option to walk away. You should have the option to leave. You should, and if everybody has closed borders, that option is taken away from you. And that's tragic.
No, it makes sense. You'd have to, I guess, have some kind of free money like Bitcoin or something that you can kind of take with you.
Well, unless there's some exchange rate or gold, you can always take gold or gold certificates or get money. I mean, there'll always be, not always, in a society where there's the ability to move, there will be ways in which you can move money.
Right.
And yeah, I'm all for encrypted money. I just think it has to ultimately refer back to something like gold. All right, Florida Nick, thanks for the support. Debbie. And Debbie, is there a reason it's Debbie now and not Deborah? Was it because I was being confused by how to pronounce your name?
It's kind of a random thing. My legal name is Deborah, and I think it says Deborah in my Gmail account, which is what I use to connect to YouTube. So it still shows up as Deborah in the chat, in the super chat. But I usually go by Debbie, and on Zoom I had the option to put Debbie. It's just, so it's kind of an arbitrary thing. Okay, now I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so are you familiar with Daniel Kahneman?
Yes.
The behavioral economist. Yes, and there's a fascinating book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and it's a really interesting book. One thing in particular that came to my mind recently was the fact that they've found over and over again that people weight losses more heavily than gains. So for example, they do an experiment where like they ask people, would you be willing to enter a wager where you could gain or lose $100? And nobody says yes to that. And they have to be like, the upside has to be about twice as much as the downside in order for people on average to be willing to engage in that gamble. And so I thought, is this an instance of a malevolent universe kind of thinking, that we think of losses as being more important than gains? Or is it something else? I mean, because I do, like, if I just pay attention to how I feel, I also feel kind of an initial reluctance I do feel a loss maybe more strongly than a gain. But then if you think about it in a more long-term perspective, if you had a policy of consistently saying, okay, well, if I can lose as much as I gain, then yeah, I'll do it. Then on a net basis, you haven't really lost anything in it. So maybe it's a failure of longer term thinking, or maybe there's something to it. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's a consequence of the fact that we're not trained to think properly. So, Kahneman and a lot of others attribute this to somehow genetics. We're programmed in this way because it's such a common phenomenon. First of all, it's not everybody. Not everybody's like that. It's the majority, but it's not everybody. And we're not trained to think long-term, and we're not trained to think probabilistically. And we do most people, because they're not trained to think, rely too much on emotions. Now, why is the fear? Why do we worry so much about the downside? Maybe that has to do with genetics in a sense that we're wired, because when you're an animal, right? When you're not a cognitive being, bad stuff can end your existence very quickly. So it could be that something in our wiring, and I wouldn't know how this works, but something in our wiring overweighs overweights signs of risk, fear, right? Mm-hmm. But then why are we afraid, right? If it's just a probabilistic, well, what am I, so I still think at the end of the day, it's a failure of proper thinking and a failure of teaching people how to think properly. Mm-hmm. I think the more you train yourself to think properly, the more you train yourself in probabilities and what they mean, the fear will go away. Mm-hmm. Because you'll understand what it actually means. You won't be relying on some instinct. I don't even know if it's instinctual, some immediate response. Your emotions will catch up in a sense.
Yeah.
And this is the thing
about. Yeah, it's true. I mean,
it would be interesting if you could take the people who overweight the downside and train them, spend like a year giving them classes and having them do stuff, and then test them again. It would be interesting if it goes away. My guess is,
yeah,
it would.
I think so too. And it's you can override it with your thinking and condition yourself not to be afraid of it anymore. But the thing that I hung up on is that it's there in the first place as a default state, and that's the part that I don't quite understand.
I think what might be there as a default state is that we're more sensitive to things that we perceive as threats. Now, so we consciously have to perceive it as a threat, but that our emotional system, our nervous system is wired so that it has greater sensitivity. Mm-hmm. Right? That could be wired. That is, there could be an asymmetry between risk, between positives and negative potential outcomes, that we just have a strong response to negatives because we're wired that way because of the risk of complete demise, right? But then but once you understand that the loss here is not a loss like that, it's a different type of loss, then that wiring, I think, becomes irrelevant. Maybe, right? There's still a lot that we don't know. And part of the problem is that, the evolutionary psychologists if they weren't determinists, then I think they could discover really interesting things. The problem is anything they come up with today is suspect because they start from the premise of determinism. And then you just don't know how much and what to believe, to trust in what they say and how much not. All right, let's see. Gene Walters writes, damn, Yaron, your movie recommendation made me cry. I watched The Outpost. Thank you. Yeah, it's a powerful movie. I'm still pissed off, but yes. And Florida Nick, related to that, says, a year ago, Joko Wilnick did a podcast with a member of the unit from the Outpost. I should listen to that. That would be really interesting to get the first-hand account of what happened. What is the first Peacock book you recommend? I'd recommend OPA, Objectivism and the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, as the ultimate summary, the ultimate presentation of the objectivist philosophy, the ultimate presentation of the objectivist philosophy as a system, a unit, an integrated whole. I'm actually doing a lecture on this at the coming OCON on the importance of OPA, Objectivism and the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. That's the book you should read. I mean, if that's too much, then The Ominous Parallels is the easiest of his books to read, and definitely recommend it. So I would definitely recommend all three of his books. The Ominous Parallels for the connection between history and philosophy, and brilliant, just brilliant. OPA, Objectivism and Philosophy of Ayn Rand, for the systematic integration of objectivism, and DIM for a very advanced kind of very advanced presentation on application of objectivism to kind of predicting the future. Of course, Ominous Parallels does that too. It uses the past to make a prediction about the future. And in both cases, the future is pretty dim. All right, last one other super chat question or two. In matters of sexuality and gender, when you have Deirdre McCloskey on, some self-identified objectivists suddenly become tribalists or even adherents of how dare you change what God made you. Do you have an idea about why they make this exception? The reason he's referring here to Deirdre is because Deirdre is trans. Deirdre was a man and is now a woman. I mean, it's a really complicated issue that I don't think I have the answers to. But it's complicated because now you're literally tinkering with pretty gross tools without much refinement. You are now changing, trying to change, or trying to influence, or trying to have an impact on biology. And I think it's very, very tricky, and it's very complicated. And I don't have the answers in terms of what if this is psychological, what if this is physiological, what if this is objective, and what if this is not. The whole trans phenomena is confusing to me. Clearly there's something there, there's something going on, but this idea of I feel like a different gender than my body is, to what extent that's psychological, to what extent that is a psychological problem, to what extent is that something you're born with in some way. How can you be born with that? Is that not an idea? What it goes back to this evolutionary psychology, which I think is still, what are we born with? And what are we born without? What does it mean to say you're not born with ideas? Well, then what are you born with? What is biological and what is in the realm of free choice? Those are tricky questions. And as objectivists, I don't think we have good answers yet for all of that. And I think that a lot of objectivists are confused about it. I admit that I don't have the answers to it. I'm not sure about these issues. I mean, I think you'd have to know a lot about psychology, a lot about evolution, and have a clear view of this. And you'd have to have examined reality and examined people and talk to people and try to figure all this out. I haven't worked it all out, Adam. So, and therefore I know other people, other objectives haven't worked it out. It's what saddens me is people who don't recognize the complexity of the issue and just have a straight out opinion about it. Yeah. Scott says, did I talk to Deirdre about it? I've never talked to Deirdre about it. I figure it's very personal. And if she ever wants to talk about it, she can talk about it, but it would seem weird for me to ask her something like that. I was once sitting at dinner with Deirdre. This is in Ireland, I think, in Ireland. We tend to be in remote places because we're speaking at conferences at the same time. We're at dinner and there was some objectivists at the table. And one of the objectivists at the table started going off on trans without knowing Deirdre was one. And she just turned to him and with a very straight face says, you don't want to go there. Just don't go there. And I basically looked at him and said, don't go there. So he backed off and we didn't go there. But so I don't know. I wouldn't have that conversation with her. I wouldn't initiate that conversation. I wouldn't initiate that conversation. If she ever wanted to talk about it, and her story is pretty sad because she has children from when she was a man, obviously, and children won't talk to her. She has no contact with her family. She's already 70 something. She transitioned at a pretty late age. Career-wise, I think she's more prominent afterwards, but anyway, I find the whole topic, the whole phenomena strange. Yeah, Edward says you have to have 2 chromosomes to be female. Fine, but that is true. But if somebody takes, for whatever reason, decides that they're going to take the hormones and they're going to take this to be something else, then they are something else. And what do you do with that? And do you then completely dismiss everything that they do? Do you dismiss them as a person? What do you do? Right? They're not exactly here nor there, right? Because not everything about what we are is determined by our chromosomes. I mean, it's hard to explain homosexuality just based on chromosomes. But what is it based on? Why does it happen? Where does that come from? I don't have the answers to those things. I mean, it's beyond my, it's above my pay grade in a sense. So it requires a lot more knowledge of psychology than I have, or that I think maybe than anybody has today, given the corruption of the field and the corruption of the field that should be look at it, which is kind of what evolutionary psychology should be, which is this interaction between what is biological and what is within the realm of free will. Those are really, really interesting. All right, one more round. We'll do at least one more round. Jennifer.
Regarding the emotion of worrying, I know some people can worry too much, but I don't think it's wrong to ever worry about something. I think there are times when it makes perfect sense. And some people say you should never worry because if it's something you can't control, you shouldn't even worry about it at all. But there are going to be times when you have to worry. I don't think it's wrong to worry ever about anything.
I mean, worry, it's an emotion in the end. It's an emotion that is a consequence of uncertainty. It just is. It's a question of what you do with it. There's no point in letting it dominate. That is, in letting it become more, given that you can't do anything about it, right? Given that there's nothing you can do in a particular situation, it can cripple you, because that's what happens to some people. It cripples them. It makes it impossible for them to function. And that's what you shouldn't allow it to do. But yes, I mean, you're going to feel what you're going to feel. And when there's uncertainty, I think we're in a sense wired to feel a certain level of anxiety, because the future is uncertain, because we don't know what's going to happen. We feel most comfortable in situations where we know what to expect. Now, but if that gets overplayed, if that gets emphasized overly, then it becomes crippling, and it prevents us from taking risks. it prevents us from acting when we need to act.
Thank you.
All right, Naveen.
Yeah, a quick comment on something that Debbie was mentioning earlier about the doctor and the religious thing, right? There's a good movie called The Physician that came out in 2013. It's about a boy that's an orphan whose mom dies basically of side sickness, which is appendicitis. And then he decides to become a doctor and he goes to Persia. So it's a really good drama where he's trying to be a doctor in this Christian, Jewish, Islamic culture in the 11th century. And it's a really good movie.
Yeah, I recommended that movie years ago on the show. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, a long time ago. It really is a good movie, and it really has at the heart of it is a conflict between the Aristotelian view of life and mysticism, and it's very, very powerful. And you see the effects of mysticism and the destructive power of mysticism in the movie. So yeah, I second the recommendation. It's very good. Big scope kind of movie like they used to make a long time ago. I can't remember who's in it, but it's a good movie.
Right, and my question is about something that you mentioned from South Dakota about this spyware or malware that the Israeli company made, right? That is infected iPhones of, I guess, some journalists or something. I don't know.
Well, journalists and politicians.
And politicians, yeah. It's called Pegasus, I think, right?
And who knows who else?
Right, yeah. So question on that. So the company that developed that, is the development of that technology itself immoral? And the second thing is, somebody buying that technology, is that immoral? I don't think those two are, because those are similar to like owning a gun. But now deploying it to somebody that you don't know, or that you can't, there's no evidence that they're a criminal, that would be immoral, right? Isn't that so?
Yeah, so I would say developing a technology is not necessarily immoral if you're developing it so that the good guys can protect themselves, right?
Right.
But then when you design, it's like building weapons. When you build weapons, I think you are morally obligated to make, to the best of your ability, put it that way, to make sure that the weapon doesn't fall into the hand of bad guys. So let's say you design an F-15 and you sell it to the Americans, and then, I don't know, the Iranians want to buy F-15s from you. It's, I think, incumbent on the company that makes them to morality. I mean, the law would restrict you as well, but morally, you should then say, well, I'm not going to sell weapons to the Iranian regime. It's not in my long-term self-interest because these are bad people and they could fire the weapon on me. So I won't do it. And you could imagine that in a free market, some of the restrictions on weapon sales, background checks, things like that, might not even be done by law, but might be done by weapons manufacturers. Say, you know what, I don't want my gun used by criminals or by mentally people who can't cope mentally or by untrained people or whatever. And that I'm going to sell my guns in a responsible way, and I'm going to require training, and I'm going to require XYZ before it's sold or something like that. So you could imagine that. But suddenly, if you're talking about big guns, where the only purpose of the weapon, the only purpose of the software is either is destructive, either in self-defense or not, but it's destructive, then you better know who you're selling it to. It's incumbent upon you morally to know who you're selling it to.
Right. Yeah. Because, I would want to own that kind of software. I would want to make that kind of software because I'd want to deploy it on the Iranian government or the North Korean government, dictators and whatnot, right?
And the challenge is today is that if you sell software like that to the American government, there's no guarantee that they would only use it on the North Koreans and the Iranians. That's the challenge that you face, right? Because we know from Snowden that the American government is quite willing to spy on its own people. So that's the sad world in which we live, where you don't know. Just because they're nominally the good guys, you don't know if they're going to behave well, good with whatever you design.
Makes sense. Thanks.
All right, Debbie.
In relation to worrying, I wonder how much of that can be mitigated by convincing yourself. I mean, because sometimes something truly is out of your control. Once you've done everything you can, then it's no longer useful. So I wonder how much of it is about convincing yourself that you have taken every action that you can. And then, and I like to think about in Atlas Shrugged, that saying from Galt, don't think about pain, danger, or enemies any longer than you have to in order to fight them. I'm a little bit practiced in the letting go of worry. I got a cancer diagnosis a couple of years ago.
Wow. Okay.
And I had to go through chemo and like the whole thing, like blast all my hair, chemo, radiation, everything. And I kept thinking about that. Like, you know what? If all things being equal, I'm probably going to have a worse health outcome if I allow myself to worry and go into these dark mental states all the time. So I just focused on my work, and I kept thinking, you know, am I doing everything I can? Yes. Okay. Then on to the next, you know, and just, it really, I mean, physically it was horrible, but mentally it was surprisingly easier.
Oh, good.
Than I might have thought. And I did have a great health outcome. It's completely gone, but
Congratulations. So
I think
you could think of worry as the signal, the reminder to do everything you can.
Yeah.
So it serves an important function in that way. But once you've arrived at the conclusion that you've done everything that you can, worry fails to serve its purpose. But for most people, you know, with the exception of John Galt, it's very difficult for it just not to be there, because there is still that uncertainty, and there is still a probability of a negative outcome that you don't want. So there's still that anxiety about that. But you can mitigate much of that through the process of, you know, doing everything that you can, using it as a reminder rather than using it as something to dwell on. So the problem with worry is when we dwell on it, and we let it constrain our thinking. We let it limit us. But if worry is just a danger sign, hey, you got to pay attention, go do everything you need to do, there's danger here, then it serves an important function. Yeah,
I definitely agree with that. Harry Binswanger gave an interesting example. I can't remember which lecture he was talking about, but that when you're in a state where you truly can't do anything, that the fear itself goes away. And he used this example of when he was a kid, he fell out of a tree. And as he was losing his grip, he was afraid. But then like once he had lost his grip and he was in free fall, the fear was gone. It was like, and it kind of an interesting example, I thought, that like of what the purpose it serves. And then when you really are in a position that you no longer can't do anything at all, that it can even go away. And that's consistent with my experience too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends very much on your level of integration and how much thinking you've done about it. And, you know, the example of the tree is very automatized. And I don't know if everybody would have the same response, right, as Harry did. Yeah. No, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, there's a point in which if you really can't do anything about it, then what's the point? But it's also true that our emotions are not in our control in that way.
No, that's true.
Particularly as adults, it's just not in your control. I mean, what you're going to feel when that moment happens is what you're going to feel. It just is. And you're not going to be able to. So it's going to be dependent on all the thinking you've done. It's, you know, creating your soul kind of thing. all the thinking you've done up until that point, and it is what it is, right? In a sense. But yes, I do think that worrying is there. It's a form of anxiety that is there to push us to do as much as we can, to do everything that we can in the face of some risk, something bad.
Yeah. I mean, it would be horrifically, like, I can't even imagine how broken someone would have to be not to feel worry if they were facing something potentially a potential bad outcome, to just be like, we'll see. Definitely can't. It's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we feel fear and worry.
Absolutely. Survival mechanism. It's a consequence of valuing, right? If you don't, when you value, you care about losing. It's people who don't value who don't care about losing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that relates to the common question. I mean, it's as well. So you only care about loss because you care, and you care because there's a value at stake. And if you convince yourself, like in the common thing, if you convince yourself, well, the value's not at stake because I don't have the $100 or whatever, then, or because ultimately, if I do this enough times, the worst case scenario, the probabilistic scenarios, I break even. The worry goes away, the fear goes away.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Noel asks, in conversations, I catch myself saying he is selfish to describe someone who is irrationally selfish, knowing that selfishness is a good thing. What other word could be used to convey that he is a selfish bastard? Selfish in quotes. I don't have one word because it depends on the context. So he could be, he's self-destructive. Certainly Bernie Madoff was self-destructive. He is unthinking. He is narcissistic. He is a predator. So all of those Landon adds inconsiderate bastard. All of those would fit depending on the circumstances. But yes, the temptation is to use selfish because that is the term, in a sense, we've been raised on. That is the term that the culture has embraced for the reason of making selfishness seem like a bad thing. But any one of those terms, again, depending on the context, would serve, if they're doing only damage to themselves, then it's self-destructive. If they're doing damage to other people primarily, he's a predator. If they're just being inconsiderate, then they're an inconsiderate. You could call them irrational, unthinking on a variety of different levels. All right, Daniel asks, I ran into this hippie chick. God, it's been like decades since I heard anybody say hippie chick. I wonder how old Daniel is. Now I'm curious. I ran into this hippie chick that said she doesn't celebrate the 4th of July because we stole the land from the Indians. It left me demoralized with just how far gone the culture is. Is there any rays of hope today? Yeah, sure. Of course, there are rays of hope. Here you are listening to Ron Book Show on a Sunday afternoon with a bunch of people who share your values. This was not possible, 10, 15 years ago. You couldn't have done it. All right, Debbie likes your dog, Jennifer. Yeah, it is a cute dog. Definitely a cute dog. It's, the rays of hope are in our ability to do things that we couldn't do in the past, in our ability to spread ideas and the hope that's entailed in spreading these ideas. It's in the fact that people are producing and creating and building and making stuff in spite of everything. It's in the vaccine and the fact that we could produce a vaccine so quickly and so effectively. Yeah, the downside is you talk to people about who are not vaccinated and their fears about that, and you go, oh my God. But there's so much good in the world. that it's sad that we have to, we have to deal with all the bad, because the bad, there's a huge amount of bad. There's no question about it. So, but part of what we should all be spending time on, focus on, is on finding the good things, is on finding the good out there, because there is good out there. There really is good out there. It might not be in politics, but it certainly is in technology. It certainly is in the objectivist movement. It certainly is in just the good people that are out there. There's good stuff. All right. Michael asks, I noticed very nasty people show a lot of empathy and compassion towards animals, while simultaneously wanting to destroy humans. The Nazis were like this. Many were vegetarians who thought hunting animals was cool. Yes, I think that's right. I mean, the environmentalists are like this. They care more about Mother Earth than they do so-called Mother Earth, than about human beings. Their focus is completely on destroying humanity, and yet they want to save one last tree or one worm or whatever. But it's not that these are values. It's almost like they are an animal that knows that they must value something, can't really value anything of value. So they value the non-human because that's the least substantive thing. I'm trying to get at a point and not articulating it very well. It's the hatred of, they hate human beings so much. I mean, the Nazis, after all, they hate human beings so much, but they can't just survive on hate. So they have to focus their love on something. So they focus it on the inanimate, on animals, right? Because they're still desperately trying to cling on to being human in some way, even though they hate humanity. That's my best explanation for that phenomenon. Probably do a whole
talk. Do you think it actually is love, though?
No,
or is it more like?
That's a good point. It's like a fake, it's like a pseudo love. It's like the love is too profound for what they feel. It's like some emotion that's replacing love that maybe is less dreadful than when they have to deal with human beings. It's not even a positive emotion ultimately. It's just less fear, less anxiety, less distress. Human beings cause them fear. Human beings cause them distress. Human beings elicit hatred. Animals are less threatening. Yeah, I think it's the threat. Animals are less threatening, so they can kind of associate with animals because they're less threatened by them. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's not love. It's kind of a fake positive emotion, but it's not really. All right, I object, right? Great talk with Kitco. Yes, I did an interview with kitco.com. So thank you. You can see it on the kitco.com website. Ian Mickut writes, last time we mixed objectivism and biotechnology, we got rapture. I have no idea what you're talking about. There is this television show called Rapture, a movie called Rapture. But certainly objectivism has nothing to do with it. Do you think I was just following orders defense was BS? Do you think that it was just following orders defense was BS? They really believed in what they were doing and were pretending to be second-handed to get away with it. Again, complicated psychological topics you're bringing up today. Wow. All right. I think it's a BS defense. But why is it a BS defense? I think many of them were just following orders in the sense that they didn't want to think about them. It wasn't that they had a coherent view about the orders being right or about the orders being wrong. They just evaded the whole issue. Don't think about them, just follow orders. So some of them, not all of them, but some of them suddenly were just mindless followers. But that doesn't make them less to blame. Being mindless is immoral. Being mindless is a moral sin. Being mindless is something you should expect to suffer from. So the fact that they were just capital just, following orders is a disgrace, is a moral sin, and they should be penalized for it. If what they did when they were just following orders was, for example, slaughter people. That's not a defense. Oh, I was evading. All right, if you're evading, well, then it's okay, right? No. Evasion is a moral sin, and all the consequences of evasion are on you if you evaded. And then there are people who are just lying about it. There are people who did want to kill, did want to destroy, did want to do all these things. How do you separate the two, the evaders versus the true nihilists, the true murderers? I don't know. I don't know. But there clearly are two options here. All right. All right, let's do one quick round with you guys, and then we'll call it a afternoon. I have to go to the airport soon to catch my flight to Madrid. I've got Puerto Rico, San Juan to Madrid, direct flight. All right, Jennifer, if they let me into Madrid, and then if they let me into Israel, it's, flying these days is very suspenseful because they can change the regulation on the fly. You have no idea if, what they're going to do when they get there. And I've got like a 5-hour layover in Madrid. I don't know if anything is going to be open. I've been told I won't be able to go to the club, to like the Iberia club, because you can't interact with other people that are in transit. You're supposed to be isolated, but where are they going to isolate you? So the whole thing is worrying, even though I can't do anything about it. But it's not really worrying. It's more, it just pisses me off because I'm at the whim of these frigging bureaucrats who can't make up their mind about COVID and the risks and what's entailed. And I'm willing to take the risk of flying. I'm vaccinated, and they're telling me I can't. Anyway, so go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
Well, why do you think it's so difficult? This drives me crazy. Some people can understand that, like, you own your house and it's your property. So if I say you have to, wear a purple shirt to come in my house or you can't come in, they're like, yeah, okay, I could see that. But if Kroger says you have to wear a purple shirt, well, they can't do that, and I have a right to go into Kroger, and like, why can't they see the difference that that's private property too?
Well, because they can't think. I mean, it goes back to everything we've talked about, right? They can't think. They're not thinkers. They can't think in principle. Everything's a concrete. They place their emotions above everything else. And we do live in a political world in which discrimination is evil. Discrimination is bad, right? So we're told that you cannot discriminate against. So it's not really private property. The government is telling you who you can discriminate against and who you cannot. So you're sending mixed signals about private property. And then, but what we've seen, I mean, the overwhelming lesson learned from COVID, in my view, is that people can't think. Or won't think is a better way of saying it. It just drives me nuts. And it's still going on. Like, now we have the data. Like, the data is consistent with what we knew in March of last year. But now we have a lot of the data. Now we really have data. It's good data. It's overwhelming. People still can't think about COVID. They have no ability to think about it. And in face of fear, in face of the tribe, and in the face of their emotions, they don't know what to do. They just collapse.
I think it's partly altruism too, because they don't necessarily need to go in your house ever, but I need to get food. You have
Yeah,
to give it
it's
to
the
me. 'cause-
demand for other people to sacrifice to them, and I need to get food without a mask on.
Yeah.
All right. Somebody's asking if Allie is my producer or my wife. She's neither. She is my cheerleading section. She is the rallying cry for SuperChat. All right, Naveen.
Hey, Ron. I don't have any question, and I'm glad. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you before if you could separate the AMA and the Zoom thing, because sometimes we don't have, when you have them back to back, you don't have enough questions, and some of the same people join.
I think I'm going to make it a regular thing where we separate them out for that reason. I noticed that in past weeks. But this time I separated out because I was originally planning to fly to Israel like Wednesday, and I was going to do a show on Monday, but now I shifted and flying out today. So I had to cancel tomorrow's show. So we're doing the AMA on like the middle of 12th of August, I think. Sure.
But I do have a recommendation to ask. Any literature recommendations? I recently read 93 by Victor Hugo, and it's awesome.
Isn't it like blue? Yeah. It's like it's one of the greatest books ever.
It's great, and I can see why Rand likes it. Rand, I think, gets a lot of her style from Hugo, which is great. But any good literature recommendations?
Well, here's a book I really liked. I just remembered, but the caveat is Leonard didn't, right? So for what it's worth, and Leonard's the expert on literature, not me. I really like Ivanhoe.
Okay.
And of course, a book I like and Leonard likes is The Count of Monte Cristo. And I think all those books, there's a guy named Sabatini who wrote some really cool romantic adventure stories in the 19th century that I loved. And there's like 20 of them, and they're all, you can't read them all at once because they're too similar to one another, but like sprinkle them through, it gives you this great sense of life and efficaciousness and just romantic vision. They're not Hugo. None of these are Hugo, but they're all, they're all good. I really liked Ivanhoe. I don't know why Leonard didn't like it. Anyway, he doesn't. And I think he once made me swear that I wouldn't make recommendations of literature because he decided I knew nothing about it. So I got once. Here's one. One of the books by Sabatini, which is very good, maybe his best, is Scaramouche, Scaramouche, Scaramouche. I've actually got
Scaramouche, like the song.
Yes, I think it's the same kind of character. There were a lot of stories written about that character. I like Sabatini. I went through a Sabatini phase a few years ago, and I read a bunch of his. Oh, well, there's what's his name? Neville Shute, Shute. Wonderful. Oh, I could go on now forever, right? Every time I think of an author, some other author by association comes up. But Neville Shute, some of the most benevolent stories you'll ever read, and a reverence for engineering, and a reverence for wealth creators, the kind you don't see anywhere. The only one I don't like of Neville Shute, thank you, Kudubaba, that's his name. The only Neville Shute book I don't like is On the Beach. But all the others I've read are just magnificent. Anyway, that'll give you a few years of reading.
Oh, got it. Thanks.
Sure. Debbie. Oh, yeah, Debbie still. Yeah.
I have more to say about the literature. So Kira Peikoff, I love Kira Peikoff. It's modern, of course, but yeah. I love her books. She's written like 4, I think, and I always just devour them as fast as I can when they come out.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Living Proof, No Time to Die, Die Again Tomorrow, and Mother's Knows Best. Those
I haven't read.
Yeah, so very love Kira Peacock. And it's
Sounds like
like
James
the only
Bond.
thing, my only complaint is that I go through them so fast and then I desperately want another and I have to wait too long. So Kira, if you're watching, let's get going. And then also Quo Vadis. That's a good 19th century one.
Yep.
It's very pro-Christian,
yep.
But it's so well written.
Yep.
And so I can tolerate the Christianity, the ancient Christianity. So very good book. And then also you recommended to me a while back to listen to the lecture series 8 Great Plays by Leonard Peikoff.
Yeah.
And I did. And I can't wait. I've got it's amazing on Amazon. I got for $1.99 the complete works of Victor Hugo on my Kindle. So I'm still working on that. I'm a little more than halfway through that.
Great.
But next I've got Antigone queued up and I'm gonna read those plays that Leonard talked about in that. So if you listen to the lecture series in itself is worth listening to, Naveen. It's awesome. But then it also
read the plays while you're listening to it. Read the plays.
Read them. Yeah, I did not. I just I went through the lecture, but I am gonna read them after, and then maybe listen to it again.
Oh, just a plug.
Didn't have the patience.
One of the plays in the lecture, and in some ways my favorite play, was Monavana. Do you remember the Monavana lectures? Well, that play is going to be performed at Ocon this year.
Oh.
No way.
Live performance of Monavana at Ocon, and then Shoshana Milgram Knapp is going to give a lecture about the play. So it's going to be, just for that, it's worth going to Ocon, just to see Monavana.
I will be there
on stage.
I have to read it
Yeah.
Yeah, and listen to the lecture. But you know what else is just incidentally, that's my last comment, that lecture made me appreciate modern technology and Amazon specifically so much, because Leonard talked about the trials and tribulations he had to go through to get his hands on a copy of Monavana. He had to go to some kind of Dutch consulate or something. He was going all over New York City, traipsing around looking for just a copy of Monavana. And then, any of this, you can just go on Amazon like that, and you can have your pick. So thank you, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, I will say this, given that we're talking about Leonard, last time I saw Leonard, it was just about a week or two ago. I was in his living room, and he had all these books on his coffee table. They were books that had come from storage and bought. And this was an amazing treat. And they were all Agatha Christie books. So there's an author, all Agatha Christie books. And most of them were Ayn Rand's Agatha Christie books. And if you open them, she had a little A, she'd write A on them when she read them the first time. And then she'd cross the A out when she read them the second time. And almost all of them were crossed out. So she read them twice, right? And there they were, just a couple of dozen of these Ayn Rand, Agatha Christie books with Ayn Rand having written in them and crossed them out. So that was a real treat. It was cool. Cool. Let's see. I think there was one quick. Father Nick just says Rapture is a city from the video game BioShock. Okay, I see. Not a very positive portrayal of objectivism in that one. Got objectivism completely wrong. Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Naveen. And thank you all, guys. Thanks for the super chatters. You guys did not make Allie's goal today, so you've left unhappy. But we did so well yesterday that I think Allie will survive. I think she'll be okay. Thanks. And if somebody wants to drop in and drop $200 just to make Allie's day, I'm sure she'd be happy. But I think we're all good. All right. Have
a great trip you're on.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, have a great trip. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So I'm gone for 2 weeks. So this is part of the uncertainty, the worry, the frustration, I want to strangle somebody sense. I still haven't exactly figured out if I can go to London or not. I think I can go to London if I stay in Israel for 10 days. But that means I'll only be able to be in London like 2 days because so it's just, so I think I'm going to have to change my flights once I get to Israel. And that is as long as the UK government keeps Israel as a green country. If they move them to amber, I can't go. I'd have to quarantine for like 14 days. I'm fully vaccinated, people. Kind of, at least Israel will let you take a antibody test because they don't believe those stupid dinky CDC cards. But at least they'll let you take an antibody test. And then if you have antibodies, they'll say, okay, you don't have to be in quarantine. The Brits won't do that. And on the other hand, the French are the rational ones these days, right? You can, if you're vaccinated, you can just come in. No, they just ask you, are you vaccinated? You say yes. They say, okay, you can come in.
Oh.
Same in Spain, the same all over Europe. It's the British and the Israelis that are freaking out.
I do hear there's lots of protests going on about, vaccinations and lockdowns.
Protests in France are about the fact that starting later this week, to go to a restaurant in Paris, in France, you will have to show proof of vaccination.
Oh, wow.
You're going to have to download this app. And so that it's a vaccine passport, and it's everything. It's concerts, it's big events, it's restaurants. And that's what the demonstrations are about. And they're right, because the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, if somebody is not vaccinated, then it's on them. But that is, Brian says, Iran is a super spreader of the freedom variant. Freedom's highly contagious. I wish it was highly contagious. The problem with freedom is it's not highly contagious. I have to get really, really close and tinker with your brain.
And everyone's been vaccinated.
Yes, and 90% of the population has a vaccine. So I have to override the vaccine. So it's very difficult. But yeah, the whole traveling thing is an adventure. And you have to wear a mask on the plane. And I guess this is the first time I'll be on a plane overnight where I'll have to sleep with a mask on. God, let's hope the Spanish are not like the Americans in terms of even on flights now in the US, it depends on the crew. Some crew are like little fascist when it comes to these masks. They will go around and they'll yell at you if you don't have them, and they'll force 2-year-olds to put on their mask and everything. And then other crews are like, we don't care, do whatever you want. So we will see how the Spanish crew behaves on the flight to Spain. And then I fly to Spain, then Spain, Tel Aviv, and then I go from Tel Aviv to London, maybe, and then London back home. So I'll probably be 10 days in Israel, and 2 days in London, and then a day for traveling. So 14 days. I will try to do shows while I'm on the road, but no guarantees, given that it depends on my internet connection. Frank, thank you. That's incredibly generous. Thank you. You made Alejandrina's day, I think, although she says now there's only $78 to go. She's always going for it. She never stops. That's great. Brian, thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Jennifer, Debbie, and Naveen. I will see you all. If not, if not from Israel, I'll see you all when I get back. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.